The other thing that I said last week, because I stopped early because we were having the earthquake drill. Well, we didn't stop early, but I sped up as I got to the end, and there wasn't time for questions. And so I said, if you have a question about the close relationships talk that we had, tie signs, stages of courting, attachment styles, the Gottman's Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, any questions about that, if you'll write them down, I'll leave time at the start of class today and we can talk about them. Did anyone have questions like that? Okay. Then let us get on to the day's talk. Today, our subject is power and dominance. And I did not put either of those on the presentation, which would have been a good idea. Because the first thing I need to do is very quickly explain what the second word means. I mean, I need to define the first, but I need to say what the second word means and what its relationship is. Power, the definition is very, very simple. All we mean is, if there are two people, and let's say the two people are Fred and Bob. Fred wants Bob to do something. Bob does not want to do it. Fred does something, and Bob does what Fred wants. Fred had power. That's it. If you can make other people do what they would not voluntarily choose to do, that's power. That could be you point a gun at them and threaten them. That could be you push them. That could be you look at them. When I was a child, either of my parents could look at me a certain way and I would do what they wanted. They had power. So power is a very simple concept. Dominance, students occasionally get confused by that one. Power is something you have. Dominance is something you do. Here's how you might think about it. Strength, being strong, strength is something you have. Lifting something heavy is what you do with your strength. If you have no strength, you cannot lift heavy things. If you have strength but never lift anything heavy, then you're not using your strength. Same relationship between power and dominance. Power is something you have. Dominance is the behavior of using the power. You cannot be dominant if you have no power. We'll talk today about a lot of nonverbals that people use when they are exercising dominance. And if you were to think of a tiny, adorable 2-year-old child doing them, they would just be funny. They would be cute. Because that tiny, adorable 2-year-old child has no power. So power is what you have. Dominance is what you do. With that in mind, a number of weeks ago, I introduced you to a theory called expectancy violations theory. The theorist was a woman named Judy Burgoon. I'm bringing her name up again because she took a ton of research into power and dominance and nonverbals, and she organized all of it. Today's lecture, I think, will be one of my best organized, and it's not because of me. It's because of what she did. She said, nonverbals about dominance, we can put them into 3 categories. Nonverbals that show physical strength, nonverbals that show that you own or have access to resources, and nonverbals in which you control interaction. So I've got a teacher in a classroom. The students can't talk until she calls on them. She controls interaction. Now I'm going to leave those three visuals off on the left side of the screen. Physical power, control of resources, control of interaction. Under each of them, there are going to be several principles. Under physical power, there are 4. Under resource control, there are only 2. And then under interaction control, there are 5. So starting with physical power, the first principle, nonverbals of dominance, is the principle of threat. The principle of threat. Nonverbals that are threatening are a way that we show dominance. Easiest example, direct eye contact. Direct, steady eye contact. I don't know if any of you ever in the future, or maybe you do right now, but if you plan to have a dog for a pet, I'm going to give you some very good advice. If you ever see your dog make direct eye contact with another dog and keep looking straight at them and not look away, get your dog out of there because they're about to fight. If your dog ever looks at another human being, even you, and is not making cute puppy dog eyes, they're looking right at you, back up. They're about to bite you hard enough to send you to the hospital. That's what they do. Dogs don't hold eye contact very often. When they do, if it's with their owner, it might be relaxed eye contact. But if it's hard, wide-eyed eye contact and they're holding it on you, they are signaling to you that they are about to attack. That's what animals do. It's how they show dominance. It works for people. You glare directly at someone, that is a very, very powerful dominance cue. One I would not use very often. Sometimes with very strong-willed small children, sometimes it helps them get the message. But if you see someone showing that cue with you, in all likelihood, the message is one of dominance. The other cue, widely researched under the principle of threat, is the angry face. The angry face. That's a pretty good angry face. When I teach longer classes in nonverbal communication in the United States to students who've grown up under those facial display rules, often they've been taught, especially my female students, they have been taught you should smile whenever possible. Smiling makes you attractive, and if you smile a lot, you'll be well-liked. But the research shows when you smile, it undermines, it weakens, it hurts your dominance. And if you are a manager, if you are a boss, sometimes you have to speak to your employees and you have to be in charge and you have to have a lot of authority. Those are good moments for you to use moderate dominance nonverbals. They are bad moments to smile. An angry face is a better dominance nonverbal. So that principle is pretty simple. Nonverbals that show threat. The second principle under physical power are nonverbals that show size and strength. Size and strength. Now, some of those have to do with what we, at the beginning of this class, called endowment. Things that, if you don't have them, they're difficult to get. Taller people are always going to have an advantage in being dominant. Tall people sometimes have a hard time not being dominant. We talked before about somatotypes, about body shape. Some people have a very skinny body, they're an ectomorph. Some people a very round body, they are an endomorph. And then there are some people whose body looks very athletic. Their torso is an upside-down triangle. We call them a mesomorph. Mesomorphic body shape is a dominance cue. If you look very athletic and you want to send messages of dominance, you have an advantage. It's also true that people with more visible muscles, in experimental conditions, participants in studies will report that they would obey what they were told by the more muscular person if they're asked to choose between two. So, those also show that you are physically powerful. Some of the other nonverbals that fall under the principle of size and strength, there is facial maturity. Some people's faces just look babyish. In particular, I found it very entertaining years ago when I saw a string of studies talking about baldness and about facial hair. I was at the time teaching nonverbal it wasn't the first time, it was the second time. And I remember a day when a number of my colleagues were talking about the fact that their students would do things in class that were very rude. And their students would sometimes speak to them in a way that was rude. And I remember thinking, they don't do that to me. And a colleague who also taught nonverbal and was teaching me how to teach nonverbal, she said, partly that's because of your bald head. And back then, I know it's hard to see now, I just have a little bit of hair here, but back then, I had this long goatee that grew all the way down to here. And she said, put together the fact that you've got the facial hair and the bald head, and that you're almost 6 feet tall. Put all those together, those are dominance cues. And so people regulate their behavior better with you than they would with, say one of my colleagues who is female, 5'2", has a full head of hair and looks very young. There's just a difference in how people respond. Now, in line with that, not all the cues of size and strength are visible. Your voice can also convey size and strength. It's a fascinating study done by researchers at the University of California, Santa Barbara in 2010. They brought in a group of students, randomly recruited from the student body, and they had them do several tests of upper body strength, had them lift weights and do other exercises, and they measured and recorded the results. So they knew how strong these people were. They then asked them to say one phrase. It was something like, "Isn't it a nice day today?" Everybody who did all the upper body strength, they all said the exact same phrase, and it was recorded. That was all just to make the materials for the experiment. They then recruited other people to just listen to the recording. And they would listen to 5 or 10 recordings, and they were asked, which of these people is the strongest, physically strongest, just from hearing their voice? And they could tell. By listening to people talk, you can get an idea who is physically stronger than who else. Other research has shown that people who have a deeper voice and a more resonant, round tone to their voice, that conveys an impression of strength. You may be able to think of someone you've known who had a voice that just had a lot of power to it. So when they spoke, everybody else would quiet down, people would listen, and they would do what they were told. So a dominance cue, one dominance cue under the principle of size and strength is a resonant voice that conveys that you're physically strong. The last one that shows up a good deal in research, several times today I'm going to tell you that something is a dominance cue, and then I'm going to say the exact opposite is. So one thing you need to know is it's always about the situation. It's always about the context. Here's the first time I'm going to do that. A loud voice is dominant. If I get up here and I teach like this, then you may find that your mind wanders. But if I teach like this, I tend to cut through the room, and I tend to attract attention by doing that. Loudness can be dominant. but so can silence. If what they're expecting is that you will continue to talk and you instead choose to be silent, that is also a way you can exercise power, and people will change their behavior in response to that. It depends on the situation. All right. There's one of the details that comes out of the research that my eye just skipped a line. I went from height and body shape and muscles straight down to facial maturity. What I meant to mention in there, upright posture and standing with your arms out a little from your body. Hands on your hips. I think that's probably culture specific. But I think the point that they're making is, if you pull in, and if you occupy less space, or if you are bent over, those are postures that are the opposite of dominance cues. When you stand upright, and your arms move freely out from your body, that's a gesture that shows physical strength, physical capacity. Did I see a hand about to go up, or did I imagine it? I occasionally imagine it. Just making sure. Want to make sure that you didn't have a question that I waved off. Okay. So that's principle 2, size and strength. Here comes principle number 3. Invigoration. Invigoration. That's the label they put on it in research. I think you could also just call it energy, and that's probably a better word. Some of the examples of the principle of invigoration. If you enter a room quickly, but quickly in a very specific way, you can walk quickly in a way that looks nervous, or you can walk quickly in a way that looks confident. I've heard it described as some people walk quickly as though they know everybody will just get out of their way. If you can picture that walk, that's a dominance cue. When people walk, not worried about what's in their path. A second cue associated with dominance under the principle of invigoration. Big, expansive gestures. Gesturing, the way we sometimes put it when I teach advanced public speaking, is gesturing from the shoulder. If you're going to talk, very often people, when they talk, if they gesture at all, they do it like this. But when you speak as though you're speaking to a crowd the size of a football stadium, that is something under the principle of invigoration that demonstrates that you're being very forceful, and people do respond to it. Finally, there is speaking rapidly, speaking very quickly, up to a point. Similar to, you could walk into a room quickly in a way that shows you look nervous. You can also speak quickly in a way that sounds as though you are nervous. But you can also speak quickly in a way that shows you don't have to pause to decide what word you want, that you are very assured of what you mean, that you know exactly what you're talking about, and if you speak that way, rapidly, from confidence, that is a dominance cue. Now, I said a moment ago, some of these dominance cues are going to contradict one another. Here we are on the dominance cue about being energetic. The next one seems to be the opposite. Nonverbals that show that you are relaxed can also be dominance cues. Now, the important thing is, you cannot look like you don't care. You cannot look like you've given up. Giving up can look like relaxation. Not caring can look like relaxation. But there are details that will show other people, I'm relaxed because I don't care. I'm not paying attention, my eyes are wandering away. Or I've given up. Maybe I have a sad expression on my face. Maybe I look exhausted. But when you're paying careful attention to what's going on, and you don't look the slightest bit worried. One thing we're going to talk about at the end of class today, I'll give you a quick preview of it now. Mostly you see people using dominance cues when you see two people using them on each other. You don't commonly see the powerful party use dominance cues on the powerless party. You see them using dominance cues on someone else who also thinks they're powerful. So if someone comes and yells in your face and walks straight up to you inches away and tries to intimidate you, tries to scare you, and you stand there looking relaxed, oh, you're cute, you think you're something. That is a set of nonverbals that conveys dominance. So, those principles: threat, size and strength, invigoration, or you could call it energy, relaxation, those are the nonverbal cues associated with power, physical power. I'm going to pause here for a second to see, do you have anything you want to ask me about any of that? Yes, ma'am.
It's not very intelligent.
Okay.
But it's just a different curiosity.
Please.
If there's a person who's really muscular
Mm-hmm.
and there's a person who's bald,
Mm-hmm.
which would be more?
That's okay. I just heard a superb question, so I'm going to spread it to the room. If you have one person who's covered in muscles and another person who's bald, which one is more intimidating? The thing about, whenever you talk about nonverbal cues, you're sending nonverbals at me, dozens of them through different channels right now, and I'm sending a lot of nonverbals at you through different channels right now, and they mix. And they don't always converge. They don't always amplify one another. So I have a bald head. That's a dominance cue. I also showed up a couple of weeks ago in a shirt with little airplanes all over it. That was not a dominance cue. Sometimes the different cues you have cancel each other out. I would say a person with a lot of muscle, I would also want to see that person's eye behavior, hear that person's voice, and see if lots of cues were converging. So you can take someone who's otherwise very nervous, has a very withdrawn posture, and they're bald. They've got one dominance cue, but the other cues are all submissive cues. And it's very, very tricky to try to assign precise scores to each of these cues because it's really kind of in the eye of the beholder. But if all the cues, voice behavior, eye behavior, posture behavior, are all submissive, but there's just that one, the bald head, then I would say the bald head is not going to overcome anything else. That's how I would read that. Do you want to follow up, or is that good? Okay. That was a really good question. Do we have other questions while we're parked here? Okay. The second category, control of resources. There are only two principles, but we have quite a few examples of each. The first is that you own or have access to territory. You own or have access to territory. The president of an organization is the one who has the big office. The senior vice presidents have large offices, not as big as the president, and probably close to the president. People further down in the organization might not have an office at all. They might share the space they work in with lots of other people. People who are powerful and have higher status also tend to have larger houses. The houses and offices of powerful people are more likely to have a guard waiting outside. If you go to a company and you want to meet with, someone who was hired just this year and is in their first year working with the company, probably you can walk right in, you can ask where they work, you can step in and have a chat with them. But if you go to the president, there will be someone sitting at their office door, a secretary, a receptionist, who's in charge of their schedule, who will make an appointment for you, and you can't go in until you have that person's permission. So their space is bigger. It's also not available to you. It's guarded. You cannot go in. Powerful people also tend to have, for the decorations in their office or their home, they will have very expensive, luxurious things, and also things that show their status, things that show prestige. I have been in higher education teaching college for 30 years, and I don't think I've ever been in a professor's office where they didn't have their diploma on the wall, because they want you to see, I have a master's, I have a doctorate, right there it is, you can look at it. And people do that, they'll put things on the wall or things on display that show their accomplishments. They'll show awards that they've been given. All of that is so you can see, without them mentioning it, where their power comes from. More powerful people also have the authority, they have the privilege to enter into the space of less powerful people. So, if you're the president of the company, and maybe the employees who've just been hired, maybe they have a locker where they put their things, they put their coat when they come to work. You have the authority to go open that locker and search it if there's a reason you need to. But if that new employee comes and breaks into your office, they're going to be fired that day. So the power goes, it doesn't go both directions. The more powerful person has control over the space of people further down who are less powerful. And then finally, whenever people gather together and one person is clearly more powerful, something that's been demonstrated repeatedly, experimentally, they take up more space. They may move more, they have bigger gestures, and, to me, most interesting of all, when one person in the group is much more powerful, other people won't stand as close. They stand further away. They give the powerful person more space. The other principle under the category of resources, there's territory, and then the other one we just call resource control. And it refers to things which are valuable. More powerful people are more likely to have clothing that is in some way valuable or scarce. I picked for this, the story accompanying this photo said what she has on is a 12-layer kimono that costs 2,000 euros just to rent. So that is one expensive outfit. Powerful people are more likely to have designer exclusives that nobody else in the world has. Not just expensive, but impossible for anybody else to get. They're more likely to have more fashionable accessories, shoes, cosmetics, more fashionable haircuts where you have to have an appointment from the hairstylist. And interestingly, when people have clothing on that other people can tell is very expensive, they can walk in public and people are more likely to get out of their way. There was a study done in 1955. This is a classic. This was in Austin, Texas, in the United States, the state I grew up in. And I love this experiment because it was so simple. What the researchers did, they had their graduate students go down to a very busy street corner, stand there at the corner until a few people gathered, and then cross the street against the light. They would disobey the crosswalk. And the only thing, they would have another graduate student stand nearby and write down how many other people crossed the street with them. And the one thing they varied was, sometimes the graduate student would be dressed like a college student, casual, t-shirt and jeans. Other times, the graduate student would wear a suit. And whenever they wore a suit, many more people would cross the street with them. If they were in a t-shirt and jeans, nobody would. So you show by your clothing, you wear clothing that looks like a powerful person will wear it, and other people will follow you. And that study has been replicated. People have repeated the exact same study and gotten the exact same results over and over again. It's a very popular study for college students to go out and recreate on their own campus. And it just about always works. One resource that we include under this principle is time. The powerful person gets to schedule meetings. The president of the company gets to say, you will come to a meeting tomorrow at 2 p.m. Whatever else you had planned that day, cancel it. They get to start the meeting. They get to say when the meeting is over. They can postpone the meeting and start it late if they need to. But if you need to meet with the more powerful person, you ask for an appointment. They will let you know when it is, and they may need to cancel it. They have control over your time. You do not have control over their time. Another example that we talked about a while back, we talked about the difference between monochronic and, whoops, I misspelled that. Where's the eraser? Monochronic and polychronic time. It's very common for the more powerful person in an organization to make time for you to talk with you and at the same time do something else. They may have to field emails, or they may invite you in to say whatever you need to say while they have someone else in there. They may talk to 3 or 4 people at once. But if the more powerful person needs to meet with you, you would better not do anything else while they're there. They will expect that they have your undivided attention. Their claim on your undivided attention is a resource that they control. And finally, more powerful people, they get to define when they take leisure time. They get to define when they take relaxation time. They can take a longer lunch. They can take the day off. They have that authority. One thing I'll mention here just in passing. I came here to Japan, and one of the differences I saw with college in Japan, they do it over at Tsuda, and I think they do it here too. Professors, when they arrive in the morning, they clock in. They check in to let the university know that they arrived on time. In the United States, that would be bizarre. No professor does that. You arrive when you choose. You leave when you choose. The classes, you have to make it to your classes on time. But other than that, you come and go as you please. Here, that's different. Some things are culturally different. That's one of them. All right. So the principles under resource control were owning or accessing territory. And the second one, they call it valued resource control. Territory is kind of its own thing, and then everything else, your clothing, your use of time, everything else is in a separate category. Anyone interested in hearing or asking me a question about that? The final category, interaction control. We have 5 principles here. There is, first of all, what we call territorial rulemaking. Territorial rulemaking. The first thing to say about this, my visual here is judges in a courtroom, because judges in a courtroom get to say what correct behavior is or is not. And they get to call you out and say, your behavior is not acceptable. They could find you in contempt of court. Teachers also get to do it in the classroom. They get to say, in my classroom, here are the rules. There are some professors who assign seats. I want you to sit in this chair. I'll give you one example. I have not in this class said anything about where you sit. I think you should choose where you sit because you know what works for you. But a class I teach very, very often is public speaking. And actually next week, our subject in here is nonverbals that make your public speaking more effective. When I teach public speaking, I have a rule. You may not sit further back than an empty chair. We fill the classroom from the front. I do that because if you're giving a speech for the first time and all the students in the class are back there in those back rows, that non-verbally tells you they don't want to be here. But if everyone fills up the front rows, that's just a subtle little nonverbal signal that people are interested. So I enforce that rule, and because I have power in that setting, by the principle of territorial imperative, I can do that. The other example under the principle of territorial imperative, the powerful party can tell other people to come to her territory. So, the president of my university, if I were ever really in trouble, and actually once, years ago, you're not going to hear the story, but once I was summoned to the president's office. But the president can say, come to my office. And I go to the president's office and I hear all about what I had better do and what it's not okay for me to do, and they have that authority. The other thing they can do, though, is they can refuse to give me an invitation. They could have a meeting where important things are decided, and they could say that I'm not allowed to come. That meeting happens in their office, in whatever space they choose, and I am not admitted. The powerful party can do that. Summon you to their territory or refuse to let you in to their territory. Both of those are under the principle of territorial imperative. The second principle under interaction control, centrality. Centrality. A simpler word for it would be being in the middle. The powerful person is not going to be out at the end, standing on the outside. They're going to be in the middle. When the prime minister meets with the cabinet, the prime minister will sit in the middle of the long meeting table. One thing well established, and actually for a very long time I've taught that this was something, or I remember reading, because there were some studies that said this, the Japanese people tended to instinctively do this, that they could go into a place where they didn't know anybody, and they could see whose eye contact was crossing and who people were looking at the most. And whoever's receiving the most eye contact, that's the person with the most power. And so what you do is you put the powerful party in the middle of the room because that person's the easiest for everybody to see. In this class, while class is in session, I am the powerful party. And look where I am. I'm where all of you can see me. That's by design. Second principle is the principle of elevation. Elevation. One example of this I find funny because it wasn't always true. In apartments, expensive apartments, you know where the most expensive apartment is, don't you? Way up on top. That's only been true since the invention of the elevator. Before the invention of the elevator, the most expensive apartment was on the bottom because nobody wanted to climb the stairs. But now that there's an elevator, put you on top, that is where the wealthy, powerful person is going to live. Around the world, and in my visual, there's very commonly a ceremonial rule that if the royalty is present, what they're sitting in has to be higher than anybody else. There's a rule in the United States that if the United States flag is being flown and there's another flag also flying, that other flag has to be lower because the United States flag has to be on top. I didn't check to see if that ceremonial rule exists in Japan for the Japanese flag, but I bet it does. When you honor people, when you build monuments to them, we have a bunch of them in the United States. The Washington Monument, they're very, very tall because that's a way that you show honor. And I strongly suspect that the reason this principle exists, this is one of the few nonverbals I bet is probably universal because in some sense it's primal. It is something we experience, every human being, from the time we are very young. Your most essential experience of not having any power was when you were a child. And think about who the powerful people were. They were all taller than you. Therefore, this feels like someone else being more powerful. But what complicates that, you remember the principle of relaxation? There are some situations where sitting down makes you the powerful person. If you are the boss and you've summoned in one of your workers, they've done badly and you need to tell them, you're misbehaving, don't do this again, you might sit while they stand in front of you. If you are serving at a banquet or if you're waiting tables in a restaurant, the people who are sitting down, they're the powerful ones. It's also a tradition in ancient tradition, both for Jewish people and for Christian people, that the teacher sits down to teach and shows their wisdom and authority by sitting. So, on the whole, being above someone is a cue showing that you're more powerful, but in some situations, being below someone shows that you have the privilege to relax. So you have to look at the cues in their context so you don't get them confused. And the one other example, I don't know why I keep doing this, but my eye just skipped a line again. One of the very best examples I've had over the years for the principle of elevation, what do Japanese people do to greet and to say thank you? And that's the principle of elevation, because lowering yourself is being humble. And I have taught a zillion students in the United States that that's an example of the principle of elevation. Then I get here to tell you about it, and my eye skips the line. Okay, 2 more principles under the category of interaction control. There is initiation. Initiation. The powerful person goes first. The powerful person walks out in front. That's the former president of the United States. And we have a tradition that the president walks ahead of everybody. If the president is walking with other people, including his wife, or someday her husband, the president is several steps out in front, because that's a way to show who has the authority, who's in charge. Royalty commonly walk alone and at the front, and the etiquette is you're not supposed to speak to them. They speak to you. You speak only to answer them. And when they move on, the conversation is over. If they are a guest at a banquet, they will sit first, they will speak first, they will eat first, they begin everything. Dominant individuals, people who, by virtue of all their other nonverbals, establish dominance, tend to be the ones who will change the conversation topic. And in some sense, changing the conversation topic is the principle of initiation. I've decided we'll talk about something else. I will begin. It's actually true, a number of studies have demonstrated this, that if you just have a group of people and one person is the most talkative, observers who don't know the group will assume the person doing the most talking is in charge, that that's the person who has the authority and is the leader of the group, which would again be the principle of initiation. All right, the final principle under the category of interaction control is in some ways, I think, the most fun. The principle of rule breaking. the principle of rule breaking. In any organization or group, when you are building your power and you are moving up, during that period of time, it is very important that you establish a record that you comply with the rules, and it's very important you show other people you have very good manners. When you're new and they don't know you, you have to show that you understand the rules and that you embrace the same values they do. And being polite, having good manners, is a way to help them grow to like you. But once your power is established, some examples. You wear what you're expected to wear. If you're working in a workplace and there's a way everybody dresses, you better dress that way. If there's a time you're expected to be at work, you better be on time. If you go to someone else's office, you better knock before you come in. But once you're established, once everyone in the group knows what your contribution is and you have a base of power, that's when you wear what you want. You show up when you want. And if you need to walk in without knocking, you do it. And people who see your value to the organization, they accept it. That doesn't form their impression of you. And I just realized I said that about dressing, and I show up in bizarre shirts and stuff. That is not actually a dominance cue. And I even said a few minutes ago, a shirt with airplanes all over it. Maybe it is a dominance cue. I don't know. All right. The interesting thing about the principle of violation is that when a powerful person meets with another person equal in power, they tend not to use this. So I teach at a university that has, 5 vice presidents. It has one president, but 5 different vice presidents. They will very often dress kind of informally, because all day long, they're mostly meeting with people who have less power. But on the day all the vice presidents meet together, they wear suits. If they're going to be in a room with other people who have equal power, then they are going to dress very carefully. That meeting with the other vice presidents, they'll be on time to that. With me, they might keep me waiting. Maybe they're busy, maybe I had an appointment, and the meeting starts 10 minutes late because they're working very hard. But they don't keep the other vice presidents waiting. The final thing to say about the prerogative of violation, the fact that powerful people will sometimes leave a meeting early, or that powerful people might not answer an email or a text message, often lower power people will interpret that as they're very, very busy, and that makes them seem more important and therefore more powerful. And the point here is the particular rule breaking that they do may be interpreted as more evidence of how important and therefore powerful they are. So rule breaking is not only something you get to do, but rule breaking can create the impression that you are more powerful than they might otherwise think you are. Incidentally, I picked that as my visual because a little while ago when I was talking about the principle of leisure and how you can take a longer lunch, that was what was on my mind. This is the president of his own company, I imagine, and he's just decided that lunch is going to last until mid-afternoon. And he can do that because he's the president. He doesn't have to run on time. All right. So under the category of valued resources, the principles are territorial rulemaking, centrality, elevation, initiation, and rule breaking. Are there any of those that you're curious about and you have a question? All right. Final thing to say, and actually, I said that I was going to save this for the end of class. I think I may have explained it adequately when I brought it up, but I am going to bring it up here. Dyadic power theory. Dyadic power theory is the work of a researcher, good friend of Judy Burgoon's, by the name of Nora Dunbar. Nora Dunbar, and dyadic, by the way, I'll stick it right here in this space. Dyadic. Dyadic, the root word of it is dyad. Dyad is simple, just means two people. If I come over here and the two of us have a chat, we are temporarily a dyad. And if our conversation ends and then we have a chat, we're another dyad. Dyadic power says people do not in themselves have power, but power exists in relationships. And every person in here, I would have a measurably different portion of power. There are people who are billionaires and heads of countries and can't get their kids to obey them because the power is in the dyad. The other implication of dyadic power theory is what I was saying before, that for the most part, dominance behavior does not show up between a very powerful person and a low power person. You see power exercised when two powerful people are in some way wrestling to see who's the more powerful. Sometimes two people who see each other as rivals, they will use dominance cues to try to establish that they're the more powerful of the two. So, a number of experiments demonstrated that if you put two people who've never met into a game situation, they're going to play a little game, and if you make one person very powerful, they're the master of the game, the other one is a player with fewer privileges and they can tell they don't have any power, then there's no dominance that goes on between them. But when you rig the rules of the game to where two players are obviously both very powerful, then you see lots of dominance, because each one tries to demonstrate they've got more power. So people use these kinds of nonverbals not necessarily to keep subordinates down, but to try to keep rivals out of the way. And I did not honestly expect to finish 35 minutes early today. So what I'm going to do, I see some of you actually smiling under your masks. So what I plan to do is open the floor one more time to questions, and it's not just for the discussion today of power and dominance. What you have coming up, you have the field report assignments, and you have the article report assignments. We have one more class meeting in December, then we have a couple of class meetings in January. We're getting close to the time where you're probably going to need to go out and get some of this work done. Is there anything about these assignments you want to ask me? Because now would be a good time when the deadline is not that close. And we have time. I mean, we're not going to use our whole 35 minutes, but we might use 5 or 10 if someone has a really good question. Yes, ma'am. Yes?
I was asking for 2 weeks
Mhm.
because I have colonization and I just don't have any information about active learning. So
Okay.
I'd like to hear about the assignments.
Sure. Okay. Let me jump out of this. And, oh yeah, here was my visual for dyadic power theory. I thought sumo wrestlers, why not? Let me get out of here. And let me get this up as a visual. Here in Moodle, and this should be available to you, I got a little system announcement a few weeks ago that says that there are a number of people who've never gotten into Moodle at all. If you don't know how to get into Moodle, please, you might have to ask the computing center, but there are resources in Moodle that I think you need to get these assignments done. We have the field report. You and a classmate go to a public place, watch people until you see nonverbals that the two of you interpret differently. And when you've done that with, let's see, what was the quota? 3 different nonverbal cues in 3 different weekly course topics, then there is a report that you fill out. field report submission. The assignment instructions, you and a classmate pick an article from among these. The two of you talk it over. You then make a video in which you report what the study, how it was set up, and what they found. And then you will be assigned another pair, and you're going to ask one question and put that up as a video. Now, what we did several weeks ago, I randomized the list of people who were in the class, and I put people into pairings. And I think I have the spreadsheet with all those pairings linked here. Yeah, assignment partners. What we have, though, we have for both of these assignments a trio. And I believe the trio is the bottom three on each. Tell me if that's also your understanding, that for the people watching assignment, the trio is Terayoko-san, Mishard-san, and Ianage-san. Is that correct? Are any of the three of them here? Oh dear. And then for the article reports, the trio, I believe, is Kurosawa-san, Yomo-san, and Nishi-san. Is that correct? Is anybody here? What we need to do, and what I think is the simplest to do, if you didn't get a partner for either of those assignments, we can take the trio and take one of the three and make them your partner. And then we have two partnerships. So what I will do is I will send several emails, and I'm going to try to do that. It might happen today, it might happen early tomorrow, but you'll be on those emails. And it's that you need a partner, and I'm going to see which of the three would like to be your partner. And, let's see. Forgive me, what is your name? Sakurako? Okay. Then, let me come over here, and actually, as soon as I dismiss class, what I'm going to have you do is you can stick around, and I'll make sure that I have your name correctly so that I put you on the emails and I don't mess anything up. I said that very quickly. Hang out after class. Just stick around after class for a few minutes. Does anyone else have any questions that you need to ask about the field report or the article report?
Is there a question about, I think there's no trio in the group partners. I think there's
Maybe. Well, no, you're right. You're right. But there was a trio. What did we do?
I think there was another person who changed to the class. So we were partners.
That may be. Well then, what we can do instead is we could add you to the bottom pair on each of the assignments and make those into a trio. That's even easier. I can just contact them and say, you now have a third partner. And then, ideally, in the next week or after, they come to class, you talk to them, and you figure out what they're doing, and you have partners. Thank you. That's very good news. And I would not have known. Because I can't figure out that 17 minus 1 is 16. All right. Is there anything else? Oh, yes, ma'am.